Okay, last talk of today is the talk of Michael Reichert from Nakaner and OpenRailwayMap, and he will talk about railway mapping at OpenStreetMap.
Thanks for the introduction. I'll talk today about railway mapping. First, I'll talk about the tagging of railway infrastructure in OpenStreetMap, of tracks, of stations, of signals, and of the terrain protection. And afterwards, in the second half of the talk, I will talk about the mapping techniques I use, and at the last two topics are small topics, some numbers, how many signals are on OpenStreetMap, and a little bit about the community which maps railway infrastructure. Railway infrastructure is mapped using the railway key. It's pretty simple, just use railway equals rail for a railway track, tram for a tram track. Other types are light rails, subways, monorails, and funiculars. There's sometimes a dispute between tram and light rail versus subway. It depends on the city, what value you use. Ask on the local mailing list or a better suited mailing list if you're not sure. If you map a railway, always tag the gauge key, even if it's the default gauge in this country, because if no gauge is tagged, no one knows which gauge the track really has. If it's a rack railway, don't use railway rack, use railway rail, and rack equals yes or apt or locher or whatever system is used on this railway line. The electrification is tagged using the electrified key, the voltage key for the voltage, and frequency for the frequency of the power. There's a tag which is known only by a few mappers. It's called railway preferred direction. It is I suggested to take it on double-tracked railway lines. This allows routing engines to choose the right track because in some countries trains run on the right track of a double-tracked railway line, and in some countries they use the left track. And if there's a curve between two stations and there are crossover tracks at both stations, the routing engine may choose the wrong track, and that's not good for the visualization, and people will think that the software is buggy. Railways usually have a life cycle. In this talk, I don't present the life cycle in the usual way from abandoned to, from proposed to dismantled. I want to first present you the most important values. Disused is used if the track is out of use. Abandoned is used if the track has been removed, but the ballast is already there. And if the track is under construction, you use railway equals construction. Please also tag disused equals rail or abandoned equals rail. Otherwise, data users cannot detect if it was a railway track or a tram track. These two tags are always disputed. It's the railway dismantled track. You find it usually in combination with highway cycleway or highway track. These are railway lines which were railway lines but nowadays are used as cycleways, and only railway experts see that there has been a railway some years ago. The railway proposed is similar. These features do not exist in reality, they just exist on paper. That's a funny thing I found a few days ago. It's a raised railway line through the New Berlin airport. I think that such railway lines should not be mapped in OpenStreetMap. Sorry? If you add a railway track, I ask you to also tag usage or service. These keys tell the renderer if these tracks are important or not. Important tracks are the tracks outside of stations, and inside stations, the tracks which run through the station, and service is used for all other tracks. Now I come to the next topic, tagging of stations. Stations are sometimes mapped as nodes and sometimes as areas. I suggest you to use nodes because you can argue about the extent of a railway station. For example, the thick line is the area which passengers use to describe a railway station, while railway staff usually thinks of a railway station from the left entry signal to the right entry signal, and it's pretty long, up to 1 kilometer. Therefore, use a node and use other tags for these areas and use a relation to connect them. Stations can be asymmetric, and that's quite often the case. And in this case, an automatically calculated centroid point would be very wrong, multiple hundreds of meters away from the real station. Now the railway signals. Railway signals are mapped as nodes on the railway tracks, not beside them. Use railway signal and a large bunch of additional tags. One of the most important tags is railway signal direction. It says if the signal applies to the forward direction of the way or the backward direction or both. In this case, it's a railway signal which applies to the forward direction of the way, and it gets railway signal position equals bridge because it is mounted on a signal bridge and not right or left of the track. You can also add the reference number of the signal. Signal tagging is very complex, but it needs to be complex because every country has its own signaling system, and data users should be able to do some rendering even if they don't know the local signaling rules. Therefore, we have designed 34 signal types. These are some of them, and there are much more. And if you map a railway signal, you use railway : signal : the type, for example, main, and the value is encoded with the country, the operator of the railway line, or the rule set which is used, and the real name of the signal. For example, the signal on the last slide, that's a German main signal of HP type, and therefore it is tagged railway signal main DE-ESO:HP. ESO is the name of the rule set which is used on that line. And it's a light signal. There are tags for the height of the signal, what aspects the signal can show, and so on. Because signal tagging is complex, we only have signal tags for a few countries. Currently, only Germany and Austria have a full tagging scheme. The tagging scheme for German tram signals is not fully implemented, and other countries have, well, no usable tagging scheme at the moment. The right column shows how OpenRailwayMap supports these tagging schemes, currently only in the German-speaking countries and Finland. A very interesting topic is which terrain protection is used on a railway line, and that's a topic which should be interesting to everyone, because if a train passes a signal which shows a stop aspect, the train protections should ensure that the train stops immediately even if the terrain driver does not stop the terrain. The tagging of terrain protection OpenStreetMap is bad, because there's no good tagging scheme. The terrain protection is as country dependent than the signal systems. You have a separate key for each system, and currently it is impossible to say there's no terrain protection on this line. Now I come to the second part of my talk, the mapping of railway infrastructure. You can do this either by foot or by bicycle. Just use the roads along railway lines. Sometimes there are no roads, then you have bad luck. Or you can map on trains. There's plenty of ways to do this. Of course, you can do couch mapping using Bing or other aerial imagery sources. You can use photos published on railway forums, but you should ask the photographers beforehand. Or if your country has an open data sets about railway infrastructure, you could think of using them as an additional source, but only as an additional one. If you map by foot or bicycle, I think using GPS waypoints and notes or photos is the best one. This screenshot shows Jossam with a railway line, a parallel agricultural track, and a few waypoints in light green. And I have taken a waypoint at every signal and noted down which signal was at this location and what can it display and what can it show. You can also use Mapillary if you're a Mapillary fan. Mapping in terrain is more difficult than mapping by foot or by bicycle because the GPS signal in trains is weak. Trains are a cage of metal, and the GPS signal itself is already weak, and sometimes even the windows don't let the signal through. Location in railway inside trains, for example, at doors or at windows which you can open. The German community maintains a large list of terrains which are good or bad for mapping. The list is rather old. The first entry is from about 2007. It shows the class number of the train, where it is used, which receiver was used, location inside the train, how strong the signal was, and some notes. I don't know if other countries have such lists too. And inside train you have multiple options to map. On branch lines I prefer to take photos through the driver's cab, but I always ask the driver if he likes this, and sometimes they say no, and if they say no, I don't take photos through the front driver's cab. I use the back driver's cab as a replacement. Because there's no train driver in the rear driver's cab, and if there's no person inside, it cannot be annoyed. That's a photo through the rear driver's cab. And if the door to the driver's cab has a curtain, I have to use a window to the left or the right side. Sometimes I take videos, especially on electrified railway lines, using my smartphone and geotag them with the scripts provided by Mapillary, but I've patched them. And these photos can be loaded into Jossam, and it's very comfortable for editing. Some lessons I learned during mapping. Cameras with an optical zoom are better because they have a larger sensor. Don't zoom in too much because you will lose the orientation and have difficulties to interpret the photo. Use the windows on the left or right side of the train only as a replacement. Avoid filming against the sun because windows are usually dirty. Turn on your GPS logger and extract 4 frames per second always, even if the train is slow. And if you wear a t-shirt show with an OSM logo and the word OpenStreetMap, people will ask you less often.
This is the best.
And that's the result. In this case, a screenshot of OpenRailwayMap in Helsinki Central Station with all the main signals and some shunting signals for minor movements. Now, as one of my last slides, some numbers. There are currently almost 80,000 railway signals in OpenStreetMap worldwide, and most of them have the direction tag, and 39,000 milestones. I've calculated the numbers for the yesterday Germany extract from GeoFabric, and the numbers from November 2015 are in brackets. There are 48,000 signals in total. 11,000 of them are main signals. Almost 10,000 are distance signals, and almost 4,000 are combined signals. Combined signals are signals which combine the main aspects and distant aspects. We have 27,000 milestones, and more than a third of the railway tracks have a speed limit information. That's nice to render. And 13,000 or 50,000 points have already a reference number. The community is dominated by Germans. And that's a problem. The documentation was originally written in German, and every documentation has to be translated into English to make the community more diverse. There's a mailing list. You will find postings in English and German, and some postings in both languages on the list. Don't hesitate to ask your question there, or join our IRC. And now I wait for your questions.
Thank you for this nice talk.
Hi, I've never seen a speed limit sign on tracks. How do you map that?
Well, which country do you come from?
Germany.
These are white rectangle signs with a black border and a number inside. They are on the right side of the track usually, except outside stations of the left, on the left track of the railway line.
Thank you for those informations. Sometimes there are lines who are dedicated to regional traffic and lines a few 10 kilometers away for long distance traffic. How would you tag this information? How important, for what goal is this line made for?
Which trains use the track?
Yeah, kind of. Sometimes tracks are dedicated for regional traffic because there's a very heavy regional traffic and a very heavy long distance traffic. So they're kind of dedicated to some different traffic.
There's currently no tagging scheme for this. Use the route relations, and a good routing engine for high-speed trains will avoid tracks which are used heavily by light rail trains.
Any other questions? Yeah?
Who was first?
So for the numbers in Germany, can you tell how good the coverage is?
Well, there are a few spots where most signals are mapped and there are large areas where no signals are mapped. If you have a look, you will find only a few contributors and can see which lines they usually use for the travel. For example, the railway line from Dresden to Stuttgart is mapped pretty well, or all the southwest of Germany, because there are currently about 4 mappers which map in parallel.
No, I was just going to ask what your coverage was like as well, and if you were finished.
Yeah, thanks again. How many of the 80,000 railway signals did you map?
I think about 800 to 1,000.
Thank you for a nice presentation. I always use railways as a good example of OpenStreetMap, as it has no layers. So I put, for example, here in Brussels, railway tram on the same way as highway residential, because it adds some extra information for bicycle routing, for example. So could you elaborate a little bit, why do you like this approach? And whether you think it's a good idea?
I think that tagging the railway key on the same way as the highway key is not a good idea, because if you have good aerial imagery, you should map each railway track itself. Therefore, you have on a usual residential street 2 tram tracks and 1 way for the car traffic.
It is physically at the same area, so the tram is in the traffic jam of the cars, for example, or the bicycle route goes on the tram line, so I can fall into the...
I know the problem. I'm also a cyclist. Is it a single-tracked tram line, or does it have 2 tracks?
Usually 2 tracks, but the road is on the track.
But how do you want to do tram routing if you only have 1 track in OpenStreetMap, but 2 in reality?
2 in reality, 2 in OpenStreetMap, but on top the highway tag.
Well, yes.
I may have an answer for the question how to map railway lines and on highway tracks. In Graz we have the same problem. Mainz urged us to split up the railway lanes from the highway. And what solution did we come to? We mapped the railway lanes via the lanes tag. We mapped railway, colon, lanes, and then tram, bar, tram. And so we have the relation on which side of the street the railway lanes run on the highway key, and we have the railway lanes as an extra way.
Last question. Yeah, just quickly. What do you do with tram trains? There are quite a few trams that also run on train tracks. For example, in Tübingen?
Tübingen does not have a tram.
No. Okay,
they plan to have a tram in future.
Karlsruhe.
You think of Karlsruhe?
Karlsruhe, yeah.
Yes, Karlsruhe or Saarbrücken. Well, inside the town, the train runs on tram tracks, but outside it uses normal train tracks, and therefore you use route equals tram, but the infrastructure is tagged as it is.
I will just ask a last question, if you allow me, about the tagging scheme. Okay, the tagging scheme is meant to made on the ways, right? But I imagine a situation in which you have one railway, which with the bridge afterwards, and then the railway that continues on the bridge, and I propose somehow to get all the information in a relation that contains all the ways. What do you think about that?
Well, we already have route relations, both for the services on the railway track and the railway line itself.
I mean about the railway line itself. That
Well,
goes,
you use
say,
type
from A
equals
to B,
route.
that has to cross a bridge.
You use type equals route, route equals tracks.
I didn't get, sorry.
You map a relay. I can show it you in JOSM later.
Okay. Okay. We'll thank Michael again, and I have a piece of information after that.